Good morning from Bonn, and thank you to all of those tuning in around the world to the Global Landscapes Forum Digital Edition. Act 2 has just come to an end, and we have seen a lively discussion on the transformative steps needed to turn the tide on climate change live from the conference centre in Kyoto. Speakers have highlighted the importance of changing societal systems, from how we produce our food to how we organise our economies, and in particular the need to reimagine our relationship with nature. Evidently, we can learn from local communities and Indigenous peoples, bringing together traditional knowledge and best practice. As we continue our 24-hour digital edition, we now have the opportunity to expand on themes that were highlighted during the conference, continuing our journey around the world with 5 inspiring discussion forums. We start with an Asian focus on wetlands and climate change, hosted by Daniel Mojiaso, live from Kyoto and fresh from the conference, so I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to add. And don't forget to share your thoughts and questions via social media or the live stream chat box using the hashtags ThinkLandscape and GLF Kyoto 2019. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Daniel and the speakers, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So my name is Daniel Mojiaso. I'm with CIFOR, Center for International Forestry Research. We are very fortunate today to have wonderful speakers. I believe we will be learning a lot on the topics that we are going to discuss today, and also expressing what's happening here in Kyoto when we have the GLF, Global Landscape Forum, and also to some extent looking at the wetland as common issues and also global issues. And this particular is especially discussing about the potential role of wetland in curbing climate change. And we will see how science can help us shaping the policy agenda. Speakers who are going to share with you. First, we'll be talking about the importance of peatland. Dr. Alu Dohong speaking from Jakarta, and then followed by Dr. Haruni Krishnawati, who is the new coordinator for International Tropical Peatlands Center. So the first 2 speakers will be concentrating on peatland, and then we will switch the conversation on another important ecosystem, wetland ecosystem, which is mangrove. So we will have fresh from the ground experience from Papua. NEFCAM will be telling us about the management of mangrove with the local community, and then we will be hearing more about that from Vietnam and also from India, where Ms. Tui will be joining us later. And Bhupesh Pomia from India will be telling us, especially with the recent disaster in the state of Odisha, in Bhubaneswar. But before that, I would like to introduce you Julian Aukma from USAID, because this webinar is also part of USAID CGIAR. They have series of this webinar, and today we are joining them with this landscape forum and the issue which are related to wetlands. And Julian has a lot to say with regard to this series. Maybe you can also learn from there. But particularly today we have a focus on Asia. Julian, would you like to introduce your program with this webinar across the globe?
Thank you very much, Daniel. So yes, I'm from USAID's Global Climate Change Office, and we're very pleased to be co-hosting this webinar with the Global Landscapes Forum. This is the second webinar in our series that is showcasing some of the research that USAID is supporting through the CGIAR centers. And our next webinar is going to be May 29th. We're holding these approximately once a month, and it's going to be focused on low emissions rice in Vietnam. But first, we're going to hear about some of this work on wetlands in Asia. We've been supporting the SWAMP program for many years, and we're very excited to have this webinar. So thank you, Daniel. I just wanted to introduce the series.
Thank you for being ready in such an early time of the day. But feel free to join the conversation, Julian.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So, as Julian mentioned, we will be featuring the work of SWAMP program supported by USAID, Sustainable Wetland Adaptation and Mitigation program. We implement that in various countries, as I mentioned earlier. Indonesia, Vietnam, India are amongst the countries we are working. And we also collaborating with the Peatland Restoration Agency in Indonesia. Dr. Alu Dohong is one of the deputy of the PRG, that's what we call it. Would like to share what is being done and what is being planned with regard to peatland restoration in Indonesia. Alu Dohong, time is yours.
Thank you, Prof. Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Alu Dohong. I'm now Deputy for Construction, Operation, and Maintenance within Peatland Restoration Agency, or we call it BRG in Indonesia. And I start by giving you the current BRG institution in Indonesia. And then later on, I'm going to give you what we have done, what kind of achievement that we achieved so far, and then what kind of challenge, as well as lesson learned, and what kind of science can help us to achieve our success. So as you know, Indonesia is the largest tropical peatland in the world. And this constitutes as a national asset and environmental capital that this country have at the moment. And tropical peatland in Indonesia is differentiated from other boreal and other climatic region peatland. Because most of our peatland actually from tropical forests. However, nearly 50% of our tropical peatland already being degraded, driven by many drivers such as logging, conversion to other industrial plantation, as well as drainage and also fire in the association with this kind of conversion. And this has, imply many negative impacts in terms of environmental, economics, as well as social and health. And considering this kind of degradation, and then government already put in place some national policies to address these issues. One particular national policy is to establish, we call it a Peatland Restoration Agency. I think this kind of agency is the first and the only one in the world where a given task to specific to implement peatland restoration. So our president by his regulation number 1, 2016, established a Peatland Restoration Agency, where this agency actually given a task to carry out 2 million hectares of restoration in 7 provinces up to 2020. And based on our analysis, actually, these 7 provinces have nearly 85% of the country tropical peatland. And mostly at the moment is over 41% covered by forests, and then also covered by industrial plantation, 47% more or less, and the rest of it are still like we call it open areas, like more or less 11%. And our president actually tasked us to, as I said earlier, like 2 million hectares of target for restoration up to 2020. But based on our analysis, actually we come up with even bigger numbers. That is 2.4 million hectares in these 7 provinces. However, this 2.4 million hectares, actually 1.4 million hectares located within concession areas, and the rest of it, 1 million hectares outside concession areas. So in doing this, actually, in the concession areas, that responsibility of the concession holders. Meanwhile, the 1 million hectares is responsible of the government as well as other stakeholders in the countries. So based on our target, the 2.4 million hectares actually located within 105 hydrological units, where Riau and South Sumatra, as well as Central Kalimantan and West Kalimantan, have the biggest numbers of hydrological unit target. The smallest actually in South Kalimantan, were only 4 hydrological units. In doing this kind of restoration, we at the moment implement, we call it 3R approaches. So first R is rewetting of peat by implementing rewetting infrastructures like canal blocking, canal backfilling, deep well. And the second R is do revegetation of bare peatland by promoting, we call it seedling development, tree planting, as well as enrichment planting. And the last R is revitalization of local livelihood. I need to stress in this kind of third R is we at the moment promoting 3 bases for revitalization of local livelihood. First is land-based. So land-based, that means we have to promote this kind of paludiculture species, where really species that adapt to the wet peat and moisturized peat, like paludiculture species like sagu, tilam, jalutong, etc. And the second is water-based. So we promote this kind of aquaculture, fishery, and so on, because we aware that peatland actually 90% consists of water. So that's why we promote that one. And the last base is environmental services base, like ecotourism, carbon, and so on. So what we have done so far, I need to inform you what we have achieved from 2016 up to 2018. We managed to construct rewetting infrastructure, for example, canal blocking, nearly 12,000 units already, and then deep well more than 5,000 units, and canal blocking 143 units. Meanwhile, revegetation, we just try to do like demo side of it, and our achievement at the moment around 800, more than 800 hectares. The last one is revitalization of local livelihood. We already developed 302 packages of livelihood for the communities in the 7 provinces. And based on this kind of 3 Rs that we have implemented at the moment, in terms of spatial achievement, we already managed to restore more than 400,000 hectares peatland already. That's outside the concession of a company already done in their respective site. So based on the spatial distribution of it, I don't want to more detail on it, but as I said, those kind of rewetting infrastructure and revegetation and revitalization of local livelihood be implemented in 7 provinces in the target. recovery. And yeah, one of our intervention, we come up with the impact of rewetting infrastructure that we have established on the ground. It seemed that based on fire incident that we did analysis in 2018, actually canal blocking, for example, managed to reduce the fire incident in the restored site. But when this, rewetting infrastructure is far away, and then hotspot or fire spot tend to increase. That it seems like our canal blocking is quite effective to reduce fire on the restored site. And then we also did analysis of time series analysis from 2015 up to 2018, and the fire occurrence and has occurrence within the restored site is decreased significantly for the last 3 years. And also related with hotspot in the village areas where we intervene with our restoration, also significantly reduced from 2014 up to 2018. Now I come up with next with lesson learned that we have at the moment. So first lesson learned, actually collaborative action among stakeholders is a key factors in attaining peatland restoration success on the ground. And the second is subnational and local communities have to be in the front line to manage peatland restoration successfully and sustainably in Indonesia. And the third lesson learned that we have is local communities, local NGOs, local universities have adequately knowledge, capacity, and experience to construct and maintain the rewetting infrastructure. And under BRG coordination and facilitation roles, actually stakeholders can deliver quick and high performance of restoration result on the ground. And the last lesson learned, actually, peatland restoration that we have to bear in mind. Peatland restoration is not merely physical and technical intervention, but the transformation of social and economic behavior is the key to peatland restoration success, I think, in Indonesia. And what challenge that we have at the moment? First, actually, the most important is how to mainstream and institutionalize of peatland restoration policy measure and action into national and subnational planning and regulatory processes. That's one of the important things. The second challenge, actually, to create a number of local initiatives. I take example here, like CIFOR Green initiative to bolster peatland management and restoration in wise and proper ways. And the third lesson learned, actually, there is a urgency to create a financial and investment as well as non-financial incentive to compensate stakeholders at jurisdictional level for implementing a peatland restoration in Indonesia. And then the role of private sector to work collaboratively with local stakeholders, district government, provincial government, local NGOs, local communities, including customary rights, is important to implementing and achieving peatland restoration goals and landscape level. And the last challenge is actually capacity. Technical, institutional, financial, at all stakeholder levels need to be strengthened so as a precondition to deliver high peatland restoration. Now I'm end up my presentation. What kind of support that science can that support we need from scientific communities to deliver high performance of peatland restoration. First is we need to measure our success and impact in terms of emission reduction, hydrological stabilization, biodiversity, fire, livelihood, etc. in scientific ways. And secondly, we need to develop more technical design and material innovation, especially for rewetting infrastructure. I'm stressed about this because we don't want to use more timbers to build a canal blocking, for example. We need something that really effective, efficient, but with long-term age of the infrastructure. And the third support, actually, scientific communities need to transforming social values and social engineering in order to support restoration success. How we transport that, do this transforming actually. And the fourth support actually how to integrate peatland restoration practice and result that we come up at the moment into policy regulatory frameworks. And the last support actually, we need to develop a specific strategy and media for increasing the stakeholders' education, awareness, and capacity. I think that's all from me, Prof. Daniel. I hope we come up with another discussion or question. Thank you for your kind attention. I can't hear you, Pak.
Hello?
Hello, yes. Now I can hear it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, wetland, including peatland, are thought to be one of the system or ecosystem that can be used to solve some of the problem related to climate change. How do you see this in terms of climate change science? As you know, here in Kyoto, it has been adopted the so-called 2019 refinement of the 2006 IPCC Guidelines. It was adopted yesterday. And also the 2013 Supplement for greenhouse gas inventory for wetland. How do you see that? If the peat restoration in Indonesia is going to be targeted or used to address the issue of climate change?
All right, thank you. I think disregard peatland, especially peatland restoration into the climate reduction system, I think that's totally wrong. Because we can achieve this emission reduction, very high achievement actually through implementing peatland restoration, for example, through developing this kind of rewetting infrastructure in order to rise and maintain the water level within degraded peatland. So if we manage to do that, then and we can reduce significantly emission from drainage, for example. One research mentioned earlier that, you know, if you manage to rise 10 centimeter of water table within degraded peatland, and you manage to avoid 10 or 9 ton CO2 emission per hectare per year. So we can imagine if we can rise water table up to 1 meters, for example, in the landscape scale, and then we manage 100 of tons CO2 emission per hectare per year that we can avoid, right? So we can imagine with the government target up to 2 million hectares of peatland restoration in Indonesia, how many 100 or even million tons, 100 million tons of CO2 that we can avoid it from emission into the atmosphere, for example. That's a huge contribution that peatland can contribute to the climate change stabilization in the world, I think.
So what is wrong? I didn't get it.
No, I mean, if we disregard, peatland restoration as one of the means to achieve emission reduction, that's totally wrong.
Okay, good, thank you. Well, we are waiting for the response from the audience. I'm not sure if we can get from them. I don't see any sign of questions from the audience. Is there any? Please do so. You type your questions or whatever you can ask the presenter. But well, we are waiting for that. Again, the discussion here in Kyoto was the issue of conflicting or competing objectives. If you try to flood or waterlock your landscape, people might be scared of, and production system will be affected. What do you think about it? If you re-wet peatland, it's overly re-wetted, will it affect livelihood of people while you are reducing the emission?
All right. I think restoration of peatland through re-wetting infrastructure, for example, is not really conflicting goals between other production sectors, because in Indonesia we have two kind of separate policy in terms of implementing peatland restoration. First is in the conservation or protection areas, where the restoration, especially hydrological restoration, aim of that kind of site is to maintain as high as possible water table, because that water conservation goals, right? And this other side is we implementing within we call it cultivation site or cultivation areas, where this one we have regulation to maintain the water level at least a minimum 40 centimeters below the pit surface. So I think, and that apply especially during the dry season. So in the rainy season, actually, sometimes we can't control the water table because, peatland, as I said earlier, 90% water. So if we manage to maintain water level at 40% within cultivation site, we also manage to reduce or to avoid the decreasing of productivity of that land. For example, I've been asked for the plantation company, do you have a problem during the El Nino, for example, because of the long term of your dry season? And they said, oh yes, we have, because when we have a very low water table in our concession, oil palm production gonna reduce or decrease. So the restoration in the cultivation site, actually how to maintain the water, how to manage the water level, that's all. So there is no implication, negative implication to decrease or to reduce the production of the other commodities and so on. Even we try to maintain the production level of the kind of commodities. So I think because in our peatland restoration side, actually we not try to reflood the landscape, right? We just maintain the water level as optimum as possible in order to keep peat still wet and moisturized enough, especially during the dry season. So I think that's not a big problem in terms of to reduce other commodities production or livelihood, disturb other livelihood system. I think even if we manage to reduce fires occurrence, we can save as many as asset, economic asset, plantation asset in the communities. I think that positive impact of the restoration.
We've been talking a lot about re-wetting. What about the other practice of restoration by revegetating the landscape? I heard a lot today in Kyoto about the practice of paludiculture. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that's why, as I said, with the third R approach that we use, a land-based approach, that actually we try to promoting commodities that actually grow very well and sustain very well in the wet and moisturized peatland. So there are, like, based on research, more than 80 species of paludiculture in Indonesia. The problem at the moment is we can grow it very well, like jalutu, like gelam, and so on, right? But the other downstream side of it, like marketing, like price of it, and so on, we never resolve that problem. Actually, if we manage to develop that kind of downstream industry of it, I think many people gonna attract. We can attract many people to join into implementing this kind of paludiculture activities in Indonesia.
What about food crops or livestock or whatever?
Okay, livestock, for example, BRG now develops some livestock, small-scale livestock in the communities, and actually we try to use, like ferns, or other grasses that grow very massively in peatland landscape, and we try to use that as a feed for this livestock, and it's worked well because this kind of grass, fern, and so on, actually during the dry season, they become a source of fuel for fires. If we can use that to reduce that and put it as a livestock, food, source of food, for example, that can be very positive thing also, right? And then, yeah, we can combine, integrated livelihood system by, doing land-based, water-based, as well as environmental services-based.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe there are any other questions from other speakers. I haven't seen the questions from the audience yet.
Daniel, this is Nev. There's a question from Sigit Sasmito, and he asks, Papua peatlands are less degraded and may have different socio-economic characteristics compared to other peatlands in Indonesia. How does BRG treat this difference in implementing restoration, and what is the success stories?
All right, can I answer that? Nev? Thank you for the question. I think our approach at the moment is with peatland with still very good condition, very nice, right? And nearly to pristine condition, for example. We're promoting this, what we call it, environmental services base. Like try to develop ecotourism and so on, that really try to explore more positive aspect of this good condition of peatland by links it to the livelihood of the local communities. Like, for example, I said, like ecotourism, whatever. And then for the other things that were very high degraded peatland, actually, we try to increase the awareness of the stakeholders or local communities within that. So, for example, now BRG to promote what we call it zero burning practices to implement, like rice paddy without burning in Central Kalimantan now. Now, this year we are developing like 1,000 hectares of rice paddy without fires by using decomposer and so on. So this kind of try to give example that actually we can manage peatland as a source of livelihood without using fires. But this is like a small scale, right? Like 100 hectares is still small scale. If we successful to do it, because we already done that earlier, like last year with very small, like 5 hectares, 2 hectares, and it was really successful to me because I have interview with the local communities. When you're using fire, how many tons per hectare you have? And they said, we come up with 1.7 tons per hectare. But with the decomposer, they managed to get like 4 up to 5 tons per hectare. That's you give a straight forward example to the communities that with new technology, with new intervention, compared to previous intervention with fire, you come up with a big result, big outcome of your land, for example. But again, as I said, our policy actually not try to put the land base in the top priority, because when this kind of successful to plant something on the land-based system and increase tend to to create a huge demand of the land. So that's why we need to move forward, shift our policy into the water-based as well as environmental services-based. I think that's the most important.
Okay. In your revegetation effort to improve the livelihood, do you also involve or use fertilizer? Because there is a question from Agusti Ansari, because once you introduce crops, usually people tend to use fertilizer, and that will make the restoration effort more complex, because you will also increase the emission of other greenhouse gases. What is your practice there?
Yeah, that's why I said we at the moment we try to do an integrated livelihood system. So by developing cattle or livestock, for example, we try to encourage people to use the livestock, what we call it, a composting system, in order to increase the fertilizer, the fertile of the lands, for example, because we understand that fire, for example, earlier actually people use it to reduce the acidity of the peatland, right? But now we try to ask them why don't you use like a compost from the livestock to improve the fertility of your lands rather than use other fertilizers, because we understand by using this kind of fertilizer, I mean not organic fertilizer, for example, like urea and so on, can create another problem with the big emission in the peatland landscape. So yeah, this is transformative, thinking from business as usual, from the traditional method into the new things. And of course, this is a long process because we need to improve that through education, through training, through the awareness of the communities.
Do you have real story about that practice? Because there is a question about the success is very much related to or determined by how community, as you said, are involved. Do you have story about this success on the ground from places where you're working with restoration?
Oh yeah, I think we have a numbers of example on the ground. We often bring in people to say that success, to learn from each other, from other provinces, to, for example, to go in our livestock program in Pulang Pisau, for example, where the communities manage manage their own cattle with very good, very proportional, but we also put like what we call it cattle facilitators in that site. I put it for, just stay in the village, train them and so on. And we bring in other communities from other side to learn about it. In West Kalimantan, we have also some, like a livelihood that really success in terms of breeding, cattle also, and also planting vegetable and so on in a sustainable way. I think I can mention a couple of, but it's probably time is going.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I would like to recognize the participation of those online, and they are very active with a number of questions.
Yeah, thanks. That's good. Yeah.
And Zebedi Jisu, I'm not sure where is he. Must be Africa, perhaps. And also there is a new comer here asking you specifically about rewetting.
Yep.
Is there any positive feedback from climate change? So climate change, which is caused by degraded mangrove, is sitting back to the effort of restoring it. Do you see that on the ground?
Yeah, actually, I try to do a like simple test actually on the ground at the moment. I mean, for the last 1 year, to measure the stabilization of surface water level and groundwater table within rewetted site that where we build this kind of rewetting infrastructure. So we have two different sites. Whereas one site is rewetted site where we intervene this kind through canal blocking and the other side no intervention at all. So we have a comparison about that, and we come up like for example in terms of maintaining the surface groundwater table. Actually, the lateral distribution of the water within the block site actually up to 200 meters in the left and right side of the canal blocking. And then in terms of vertical, not vertical, but the length of the dam to manage the rise the water table up to 800 up to 1 kilos, for example. And
I think his question is around the impact of climate change.
Okay,
on
so that
effort of restoring.
Yeah, that's why I said, as I said earlier, if you manage to maintain water level like just 10 centimeter,
But you don't have water because of climate change.
You don't have water.
If climate change causing, long drought,
Okay, okay, I understand it. All right.
Yeah. So what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, actually, we not a simple one bullets to answer all this kind of impact, right? But and at least we through the restoration of peat, for example, we can reduce the negative impact of that degradation of peatland into the climate change. So rather than we just let it happen, right? Business as usual, right? Fire happen, and we the peat is dried out, for example, because of open canals and so on. I think it's better to avoid it, to reduce a bit, the impact of it. So in order to improve the landscape or the ecosystem or surfaces of degraded peatland, of course, by do this kind of rewetting infrastructure, by planting trees in that, I hope that can improve, the local climate of it. So probably the indirect impact of it can hold water through the vegetation, can hold water because of the rewetting infrastructure, and improve the climates, microclimates of the site. So I think that also one positive impact.
Thank you very much, Pak Alwido.
Thanks.
If you can stay tuned, Zebedee and Kausu, I imagine you are from Africa. The next speaker or the next conversation will be more interesting for you because Dr. Haruni Krishnawati is going to tell us about the newly launched International Tropical Peatlands Center, which is an initiative between a number of governments from countries hosting peatland. That's going to be serving and perhaps the vehicle to transfer knowledge and also sharing experiences across the region where peatland are found. Dr. Haruni, you have time to describe what is the IPPC all about.
Thank you.
Uh, 2019 refinement to the 2006 IPCC Guideline for National Greenhouse Gas Inventory has just accepted in IPCC plenary, and I'm very pleased to be one of the lead author for the IPCC refinements, especially for the chapter for forest lands. And I'm also still working as the editorial board member for IPCC emission factor database for LULUCFs and some other tasks. This is national and international. And this is just a brief introduction of myself. And then International Tropical Peatlands Center, obviously all these things are the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Indonesia to sign the joint declaration, which is an important role of peatlands at global, regional, and national in addressing climate change, protecting biodiversity, environment, and contributing to the social economic welfare of people. The three government also recognize the need to increase respective capacity through collaboration to promote the best practice for conservation and sustainable management of peatlands. There's also common interest on tropical peatland and ongoing efforts by governments and partners to conserve and manage tropical peatland in a sustainable manner. So networking and collaboration in the above mentioned and therefore our partners such as UNEP, FAO, CIFOR, National Research Institution. Sorry, it's a little bit
lost again.
Yeah. Okay. At the end of February, in 2006 of February 2019, the IPPC Interim Secretariat has been officially opened, and it is located at the campus of CIFOR, headquarters in Bogor, and hosted by the government of Indonesia and coordinated by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. The Interim Secretariat's office will be in charge of setting the framework and raising funds for the new IPPC. So this is a big challenge of us, especially myself, who has been assigned to be a lead coordinator for the Secretariat. And the role of the Secretariat, it will be responsible for organizing, planning, coordinating, and providing administrative support for the establishment of the IPPC. So, within the next few months, we have a function, including the establishment of the IPPC as an official institution by December 2019, and preparing necessary arrangements, including the rule of procedure for establishment of IPPC as an entity with appropriate status. And of course, we would like to invite other countries, with wetlands, international organization, private sector, and research institution to contribute and join the IPPC. And why it is tropical peatlands? I think this is a background why the IPPC has been established. As we all know, that the tropical peatlands store about 30 up to 40% of global soil carbon deposit on only 3% of the world's land surface. And tropical peatlands are a key component for mitigating climate change, and their preservation, and therefore is very crucial. But as we know that tropical peatlands are degrading every day under the combined pressure of advancing agricultural frontier, extractive economics activities, climate change, growing human population, infrastructure development, and other destruction pollution. And the training, clearing, and burning of peatlands is not only produce haze, but also endangers the multitude of critical ecological services that tropical landscape can provide, which has consequences for human livelihoods, health, and wealth. So there is an urgent need for coordinated, interdisciplinary, science-based national and international political response that juggle the development and climate objective for tropical countries. So it is essential to establish an international tropical peatland center in the global south. The objective of IPPC, in the spirit of international multi-stakeholder and multi-donor South-South cooperation, the IPPC is built on the principle of true cross-sector collaboration and integration, building a resilient and holistic platform for science, policy, and practice, and attracting the best minds working on research and practice in this field. So the objective is to ensure that policymakers, practitioners, and communities can have access to the sound, credible, and legitimate information, analysis, and all other tools needed to design and implement conservation and sustainable management of tropical peatlands. This is kind of scope of activities that IPPC would like to work on with all partners. That's including, but not limited to, first, compiling best practices localized, including sustainable peatland management that maybe has been solved by Pak Alu Dong, and then improve livelihood, including multi-stakeholder engagement with emphasis on gender and minority equity. And the second, would like to work on the data field laboratory through MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification for water level, subsidence, and greenhouse gas emissions, early fire detections, and fire management. And then producing accurate and precise data, reducing risk, finding new pathways for green development, ensuring participation and rights, setting up the IPPC management, governance, and partnership structure, establishing the center. And then we also would include the supporting policy and measure, dissemination, engagement, and outreach. This is kind of the activities that IPPC would like to work on it. I would like to share some activities or achievement that we have been working so far since the IPPC declare our joint declaration has been signed by the three governments, Indonesia, DRC, and Democratic of Congo. IPPC have done several activities, some of them participating at the national and international event, and then hosting the events. And the first activities, the first event that has been joining or has been hosting by the IPPC is co-hosting with the Peatland Restoration Agency on the second Tropical Peatland Roundtable discussion, which is a few days after the IPPC has been established. With the message that managing tropical peatland is a new political urgency that requires strong commitments of multi-stakeholders to conserve for sustainable use of peatland. And in the early December, IPPC, which is represented by the high-level panels, Government of Indonesia and Congo's, participating at Global Landscape Forum in Bonn, in terms of high-level South-South cooperation in action, protecting tropical peatlands together, a triple win for the climate, people, and the planets. And recently, during the UNIA 4 assembly, IPPC has been mentioned in the one of the UNIA 4 resolution, which is the resolution itself has been proposed by the Indonesian delegation, supported by other member states and other stakeholders, called conservation and sustainable management of peatlands, which is get adopted at the UNIA 4. And just recently, a few days ago, IPPC also participating at a UNF 14 site event, a United Nations Forum on Forests in New York in December. So it just come back from New York and then fly to Kyoto. We propose about the site event with the issue of collaborative action towards sustainable management of peatlands. And mangrove. We include mangrove as well to see to raise the issue of the importance of wetlands, and this is kind of proof that recognition of peatlands and their importance role in the global ecosystem, and the adoption of UN resolution is a huge win for peatlands and in the environments. I think what science can help support the work of IPPC. I think the knowledge, information, and science that has been developed through the work, such as has been presented by the first presenter, by Pak Aludohong, can be a really important to support the IPPC works. As we know that IPPC is designed to serve as a go-to space for short cooperation, which will support the dissemination of strategies and practices for tropical peatland management through coordinating and supporting collaborative international relationships and connecting different stakeholders. It is also to conduct and disseminate scientific research on tropical peatland management for sustainable development, and it will become a center of excellence for tropical peatland research to support policy development. And of course, we expect that it could provide the capacity building and technical service. As a new initiative, a new institution, a new organization, of course, this is a challenge. The challenge, of course, I find myself, this is a new initiative, government initiative, and still in the early state of development, and still a lot of things to do and to prepare, and no dedicated funding available to support our work. But it's good. It is a challenge, and need to have a legal status, small people to run the secretariat. But of course, we are very optimistic that in the next few months, or we could work together, and with the support of all partners, we are working on peatland. So IPPC will come and invite other countries, particularly with peatland, international organizations, donors, private sector, civil society, and research institutions to contribute on join the work. And this is something that IPPC would like to offer the valuable opportunity for cooperation and sharing of lessons learned in peatland policy and decision-making process. I think this is all that I could share at this session, and welcome for any contribution to support the IPPC work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haruni. So it's only 7 months. There's a lot has been done in the past 7 months as interim secretariat, which is very small group of people running this. They still have 7 more months to go before the full operation is going to take place early next year. So Haruni and her colleagues is trying to struggle with those 4 items, if I can summarize. So one is to develop the program, both research and development or implementation, with regard to peatland, sustainable peatland management, and then on the gathering of information to generate knowledge need to be managed properly so that it can be shared across the countries who are going to participate in the IPPC. And the third one, which is quite significant and very important and probably challenging, is the development of the legal status of the IPPC. So will require a lot of discussion across the country politically, right, or is it implementable? If certain form of center will have more difficulties in compared with other forms. So this is going to be consulted with members so that the legal entity will be set by November or December this year. And then suddenly, more importantly, is the fundraising, and that needs a lot of work to do. Is there any questions from the speakers? I haven't seen. Oh, there are some questions coming out. To Haruni, what is the difference of the IPPC compared with the research centers how will IPPC be implementing or filling the gaps from those or other existing organizations working on the same area? What make IPPC different?
Yes, thank you for raising this question. It's a good question. The difference between the research center and IPPC is the research center is, of course, is working mainly for the research, and the output from the knowledge, the science, the information that has been generated to the research center could be a useful input, could be feed to the IPPC. So all the outcome from the peatland research could contribute to the work of IPPC. So IPPC can be the can be used as a source for the coordination for sharing and other things related with the works that has been done on peatlands.
So I imagine IPPC will be organizing a number of workshops to collect information, gather new findings, and things like that.
Yes, that's right, Prof. Daniel.
So are they going to do research themselves within the IPPC scientists?
Yes, actually, we have draft on work plan on how we run the activities under the IPPC. In addition to coordinating plannings and provide capacity building, etc., we also having a plan to conduct the research. But of course, the research can be especially to fill the critical information gap, and it could be done by partners. It's not necessarily be done by the people working in the IPPC secretariat, for example, but it can be supported by other researchers working on any organization who would like to contribute to IPPC.
Okay, well, there is another question from Rome. Maria is asking about the way the IPPC is going to pick questions. So let me see. Well, how this South-South collaboration will be implemented. If you manage to collect information from a certain country with certain experience, so are you going to disseminate, propagate this message amongst the members?
Yes, that's the plan that we would like to collect to gather some knowledge, science information that has been done in maybe in one country and for other countries, and we could share with other countries and vice versa. So we could have activities like what we call it capacity building or knowledge sharing between experience that we have done, or maybe in one country having advanced knowledge on this, but in other countries still lack a capacity on that. So we can have knowledge sharing on this one. So this kind of plan that we can have in order make all the members of IPPC can have similar knowledge, and maybe we have work together and can have the same level of understanding knowledge on the way and how we manage tropical peatlands and conserving the peatlands.
Tropical peatlands. Well, what about experience and knowledge generated from subtropical or temperate peatland?
Yes, this is a good question, Prof. Daniel. I think because we stick with the word of tropical peatland, it seems like we are just working on the tropical countries, but in fact, we are welcome to the contribution from other tropical countries who are having experience in peatland.
Subtropical.
Yeah, subtropicals could contribute to this. It could be some may be relevant with the condition that may applicable in the countries.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. That's very clear about the scope of work the homework that still need to be done in the next 7 months, and the coverage in terms of geographic coverage. I think we've learned some about the new tropical peatland center here, and I believe along this journey we will be learning more, and I believe IPPC Secretariat will be happy to share any development with stakeholders and scientists, and also countries who are going to be interested in this scheme. Now, we've been talking about peatland a lot. Let me switch the topic of conversation here to something else, which is equally important. It's part of wetland ecosystem, which is mangrove. So I would like to invite another speaker, Mr. Nefcam, who's been working in Indonesia a lot in various remote places with community, with the local government. Very recently under the USAID Lestari project, which he will explain what it is all about. He's been working in Taimana, is a district in Papua, and also Mimika. It's a huge mangrove stand there.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Daniel, for that introduction. Yeah, I'd like to change gear a little bit, and we're going to be focusing on coastal wetlands. And I'll try and bring up my slide presentation here. Right, there we go. Hopefully you can all see that. Is that on?
Beautiful, yes.
Okay, so a little bit of introduction about myself first. My name's Nev Kemp, and I'm the DCOP, or the Deputy Chief Party of USAID Lestari. USAID Lestari is a cooperation between the American government and the Indonesian government, and its aim is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We work in 3 provinces, in Aceh, Central Kalimantan, and in Papua. Within those 3 provinces, we work in 6 landscapes. We're basically trying to reduce emissions through maintaining forests and reducing deforestation, but also at the same time addressing the policy aspects that drive greenhouse gas emissions, improve livelihoods, and improve the management of forests on the ground. So that's basically, in a nutshell, about USAID Lestari. I'm going to be focusing on one relatively small part of our landscape, even though Daniel stated earlier that it was absolutely massive. And focusing on the mangroves in the southern part of Papua, which don't get very much attention. Now, USAID has been working through USAID Lestari and previously before that, USAID IFACs in this area. We've tried to create approaches how to best look after this area and into the future. So the topics for today's discussion want to highlight the extent and the importance of the mangroves for the region, the challenges and opportunities for aquaculture, which seems to be one of the main threats to mangroves in Indonesia, especially in Southeast Asia as well, and what are the roles of local government for conserving mangroves as we move forward. So just to refresh why there is a lot of focus on mangroves in our Papuan landscapes, in our southern Papuan landscapes, because mangroves are amongst the world's most productive and valuable ecosystems. According to our friends in USFS, we work very closely with USFS through their sister projects funded by USAID. There are around 13.8 million hectares of mangroves around the world in 118 countries in the tropics and subtropics. And they function not just only to maintain environmental health in coastal zones and nearshore marine environments, but they also contribute more extensively by capturing sediments, providing food in the food chain, and prevent also natural disasters and coastal erosion. And that's becoming more and more important as we face climate change moving forward. So this is a little slide about the extent of mangroves in our project area. USAID Lestari actually works in two heavily mangroved districts, Mimika and Asmat. In 2017, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry estimated the area to cover almost 400,000 hectares. Sorry, there's a little bit of a glitch. It's actually in 2012, but also in 2017, there was almost 400,000 hectares. So this is the largest contiguous expanse of mangroves outside the Sundarbans in the India-Bangladeshi border. And it's actually one of the most biologically diverse in the world and has many endemic species. But the significance of Papuan mangroves for local communities and for the region is in their importance for providing direct catch fisheries, a nursery for fisheries. They're a large resource for timber and charcoal wood. There is in West Papua, there is one concession which is sustainably managing Papua mangrove wood, has become FSC certified. There's also a massive number of non-forest timber products, non-timber forest products, sorry, such as sugar from Nipa. High levels of endemic biodiversity also exist in the areas, and they provide very important hunting grounds for local communities in Mimika and Asmat. Again, faced with climate change and more frequent storms, more violent storms, they also provide a very, very important function for coastal protection. And finally, they store a massive amount of carbon. During USAID Lestari and previously USAID IFAX, we've done some surveys about with USFS, United States Forestry Service, I think also partly funded by the Swamp Project, and I'll come on to that later about just how much carbon storage is in there, in the mangroves. So mangroves basically provide financial monetized benefits, from fisheries, from wood, from charcoal, etc., and also economic indirect values and potentially extra market values from ecosystem services. So this is a little slide just to give you a little flavor of the importance of mangroves in Papua. And at the top left we have sago. Sago grows on the margins of mangroves, but they're also a very inextricably linked part of them. Fisheries, huge fisheries, crabs, providing timber for livelihoods. And here we have an adat house from the Comoro, which the Comoro just live in just the mangroves. There are a few upstream communities, but the majority of Comoro communities live in the mangroves, and almost 100% of their livelihoods come from this ecosystem, very important ecosystem. So moving on to a little bit about the threats, present potential to mangroves in Mimika and Asmat, and why it's so important to start thinking about policy backed up by science now. Current threats and mangrove loss in the landscape is very, very low. It's only 0.5% per year, which is almost unmeasurable. But there are starting to be more and more mangroves lost, primarily through conversion, through port sites, industrial complexes, which have been suggested for economic development in the area in Asmat and Mimika. There is an mining for iron sands, which which lie underneath the mangroves, and they're being cleared, and also the omnipresent threat of conversion to shrimp ponds, fish ponds, which is often seen as a very quick way for economic development using mangrove areas. Now, it's very small at the moment in Papua, but it has started, and we are trying to show the value of mangroves beyond the normal development pathway, which has been taken in a lot of other parts in Indonesia. So we have a potentially rapid increase in threats just around the corner. This has been as more and more mangroves become depleted in other parts of the world, and especially in Indonesia, Western Indonesia, there is more and more focus to Papua and its amazing untouched reserves, natural resources. This has been exemplified by the oil palm industry, where land is becoming scarce in the western part of Indonesia, and more focus is now present in Papua. Whereas 20 years ago we would say, oh, it would never happen. It's starting to happen more and more land is being cleared. This could happen very quickly in the mangroves. So we have to think about how to change policy and utilize the value and the economic value and the direct value of mangroves, so that we can affect policies and they aren't slated for development. Increased loss in mangrove is usually exacerbated by a perceived lack of financial and economic value by stakeholders, but not including local communities. Communities in Papua are very, very well aware of the value of the mangroves. So with that focus on aquaculture, it's often seen as a way to gain greater benefits very quickly from those provided by standing mangroves. When we go to Mimika and Asmat, we see large expanses of pristine mangroves and think, wow, there's an opportunity there. Now, CGIAR is a project funded by USAID, which has just produced results of a cost-benefit analysis of mangrove conservation compared to an aquaculture scenario in Bintuni Bay and in Mimika, Papua, Indonesia. Unfortunately, it's not ready for publishing at the moment, but I had literally got a draft this morning, and it shows that the financial benefits, and this is excluding the extra market ecosystem services potential, the financial benefits from conserved mangroves are only very, very slightly lower to those of converted mangroves to aquaculture. And they looked at a 50-year span, and they had a depreciation value, etc. And in addition, if we put on top of that economic values, we can show that through carbon storage and sequestration benefits of mangroves, we can potentially show the value to decision makers, which far outweighs that of aquaculture. I note in the IPCC Supplement in 2013 that there is already a methodology for counting sequestration benefits of mangroves and avoided emissions through conversion. So one of the most, if we look at the continuous sequestration benefits alone, that can be extremely motivation, high motivation for their conservation. Now, obviously, with that in mind, they have a huge role to play for climate change mitigation. Again, USFS and USAID Lestari conducted this above and below ground biomass survey in Mimika and in Asmat. And we estimated a total of 0.44 gigatons of carbon in the above ground and below ground. Now, if we include the adjacent associations with that area of mangroves, that increases to 1.38 gigatons of carbon, which is approximately 1.5 times the amount of carbon emitted globally. And now I'm not going to contest if people have different figures, but it's a lot of carbon. It just in this 400,000 hectare area and associated back swamps adjacent to the mangroves. Now, as I said earlier, I've just received a report from CGIAR project, where we're looking at the value of mangroves and how we can use this scientific exploration and participative research to sway and to lobby decision makers. Now, this is just again. Please don't take these as actual numbers. This is Ben Brown's personal take on the research, and he's looked at annual income or financial value, direct income per hectare for the landscape is over $100 per year, and the total economic, if you include those economic benefits, ecosystem services, etc., and that's largely because of a high, I think a very high value at the moment. We come up with a fantastic number of $5 billion total economic value of those landscapes. And those numbers are very persuasive. We also need to fill in the gap between direct money in the hand, annual financial value, and a total economic value, because that money isn't actually received under any at the moment. So there is as a role for decision makers in mangrove conservation, it's very important for decision makers to consider the financial benefits the mangroves provide locally, as well as potential economic benefits provided regionally and globally. As conservation projects, we need to constantly advocate to decision makers and to try and stem the lure of instant financial gains or benefits through aquaculture, which could undermine sustainability. But it could be offset by an increased awareness of real economic value of mangroves. So, unfortunately, the national methodology for attributing, ecosystem services and climate change benefits from mangroves, soil carbon and sequestration potential of mangroves, which is now known to be significant and reportable under the IPCC Supplement, isn't fully dealt with in Indonesia's reporting of the National Development Contributions. That's because we look at gross deforestation, and degradation. Most of the soils in mangroves are not delineated as peatlands, and they shouldn't be. And the degradation which happens to mangroves is very different to the degradation that happens in the drainage of peatlands. So the conversion and the carbon loss from mangrove soils is reasonably quick and happens within the first year or two, and it's assumed to happen within the first year under the supplement. And that isn't yet captured in the way that Indonesia reports to NDCs. So
you have 1 minute to wrap up.
Okay, decision makers need to be constant that when setting policy now and in the future. Fortunately, mangroves and papua are still largely pristine state, and the spatial plan is critical to keeping them that way. Local governments have improved land use governance and designated mangroves as protected forests under provincial and spatial plans. It's largely through advocacy and awareness raising. And Lestari, as a project, is advocating for local government support for sustainable community-based management, offtake on a sustainable basis, setting up market and value chains, improving village planning, and we also are promoting community patrols for enforcement of land use and sustainable natural resource use. But also underlining this is a policy review to enable sustainable natural resource and crab and fisheries, and that's starting to happen under the government at the moment. The central government in Jakarta is very supportive of that as well. But ultimately, it's essential to close the gap between the financial benefits received and the potential economic value. And how we do that is open to discussion and debate, and I look forward to questions about that. thank you very much, and hope I come in just on time.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nate. Very timely. Any questions from the panelists? I haven't. Oh, there's one coming up. We saw it.
This is from Richard Volk. How does land tenure or lack of tenure factor into your efforts in PNG to manage and conserve mangroves? Do communities have a strong control over the resources through customary tenure? Very good question, Richard. We're working in Indonesian Papua, the western half of the island, but I understand your question. I think maintaining and strengthening tenure is absolutely critical to mangrove conservation in the future. We are trying through community groups with the support of local government to set up local patrol groups which patrol their traditional area and enforce their traditional management systems, which is very, very conducive to mangrove protection. So I would state that tenure is so important, especially in Papua, where you have a very small number of forest guards or government agents that can actually protect the mangroves on the ground.
Any other questions? Nev, you demonstrate the carbon numbers there. Is there any way of improving, if there is possibility to improve what we call emission factors?
I think the work that's been done in Papua has only just scratched the surface. We've got a reasonably good idea of the amount of carbon that there is throughout various ecosystem types or sub-ecosystems. I think there's an awful lot to learn, and much more is needed to be done. But most notably, the science and the research needs to be translated into how Indonesia reports to the NDCs. And at the moment, I see that we're only capturing the above ground change through the FRL system, the methodology that's used by KLHK, the Ministry of Environmental and Forest. So we don't yet deal with sequestration, and it's very important to understand that mangroves are continuously sequestering carbon. They capture debris from upstream. They capture a lot of organic matter within the system itself, and continuous sedimentation locks that in the soil carbon. That's being missed. That's an opportunity which is being missed, and also I don't think the conversion issue is being dealt with apart from those areas which are being designated as peat, but not as significantly. And I think we could inform the policy through more research.
It's very timely. In fact, CIFOR has been requested to improve the existing FRL, the Forest Reference Emission Level, which was submitted in November 2015, and it's time now to improve that. And we were thinking of including, soil carbon and those which are not accounted for in the previous FRL. So, yeah, stay tuned.
Okay, thank you, Daniel.
Right. So, again, for the sake of, in the interest of time, I think we should move on. Do we have Rupesh there? You might mute your camera, or the video and microphone. Rupesh, are you there?
I'm here, Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Okay, Rupesh is part of the SWAM project, been working in a number of places, number of countries, including, well, in Guatemala, in Africa, in Liberia, Senegal. Certainly, we want to hear the experience in Asia, which is in India. Rupesh, you can tell us, what did you do with regard to assessing carbon and other issues related to mangrove conservation in the national park in eastern part of India? Time is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. I just shared the screen. Please let me know if you can't see the screen.
Yep.
Okay. So thank you so much for a nice introduction. And I'm really fortunate to be part of this discussion and share some of the work that we carried out among so many different places as a part of SWAMP project. One which is closest to my heart is obviously from India, and that's what I'll be talking about. So today I'll be discussing our SWAMP-related project work, which was done in 2013, and which focused on Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary. Core area of this wildlife sanctuary is also a national park. But it presents an interesting case because it's a coastal wildlife sanctuary, which has a significant mangrove extent, and it has a huge human population living within the confines of wildlife sanctuary. So that presents an interesting mix of human population pressure as well as government's policies towards protection of mangroves as well as wildlife which resides in this wildlife sanctuary. And it presents a lot of challenges, a lot of issues, and amidst that mix, no one has done scientific, robust assessment of carbon stocks in these mangrove. So this is just to give you a brief sort of a background of area and what we did. So let's jump in. Although we pretty much as a group of folks here know the importance of mangroves and peatlands as one of the important carbon-rich forests in tropics as well as in subtropical areas for temperate peatlands. But mangroves are exceptionally important because they store about 1.6% of tropical forest biomass on an area which was less than 1% of tropical forest area. So that basically means mangroves disproportionately store more carbon than any other forest ecosystem on the planet. And by sequestering and storing large amount of carbon, mangroves therefore play a crucial role in climate change mitigation. This carbon which mangroves store and sequester is also known as blue carbon. Other than this important role in terms of climate change mitigation, mangroves are host of numerous other ecosystem services, which includes food, fiber, fuel, and they are also important in protecting shorelines. Hence, overall, this ecosystem is very important for sustainability. This map shows the extent where mangrove ecosystems are found. It basically shows all the three ecosystems that contribute to blue carbon, which is seagrass, salt marsh, and mangroves. Mangroves are mostly confined within the tropical zone. Today, I'll be discussing an area in eastern part of India and Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary. So, India has second largest mangrove forested area in South Asia after Bangladesh. But India experienced huge mangrove losses between 2000 to 2012. And some of the reasons for these losses were activities such as agriculture, aquaculture, embankments, coastal development, and diversion of fresh water away from estuaries. Our focus today is going to be on Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary, broadly an area of about 700 square kilometers, which has extensive mangroves within the deltas of three rivers, Mahanadi, Brahmani, and Bethel. This is a map of Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary. The outer boundary is shown in the yellow line, and in the center is the core area, which is the national park, which enjoys much more protection. But outside the core area, the area which is wildlife sanctuary has sort of mixed use where people live and go about doing their day-to-day life in terms of agriculture, raising cattle, and they harvest some of the mangrove in this area for their sustenance. So they are sort of permitted to live within this area. These are few of the pictures of immense biodiversity and wildlife that this area support. And I try to juxtapose it with some of the shots taken during our field work from within the wildlife sanctuary. And you can see people doing about their business, and as I mentioned, rearing cattle, or going to the photo on the left with the person with his wife and the kid is going to a medical center probably nearby. So that tells that small health centers also operate within.
Oh, we lost your voice.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary is important biodiversity-wise because it has more than 300 different vegetation species. So other than mangroves, it has other vegetation, which is important, and people and other and organisms depend on them. There are 31 reported mammals, 29 reptiles, and 174 bird species. So this basically is a very, very rich area if you think about it. Even though a huge population pressure exists in this area, but so far it has maintained its importance as a good sustainable habitat for wildlife and vegetation. I think one of the most important, I would say, flagship species for this wildlife sanctuary is saltwater crocodile, which is considered to be Asia's largest. And it is one of the important success stories because it was saved from the brink of extinction. There was about only 60 or 70 individuals left. And then the government of India, the wildlife department, with some funding from FAO, had a project in 70s and 80s where they raised these from the eggs, and then they were released in the wild. And now we have a thriving population of saltwater crocodile. This area has high human population, as I mentioned, which can be divided according to the Revenue Department of India. There are 336 villages with approximately 150,000 people who live within wildlife sanctuary. So this gives you an idea of the amount of pressure that the resources experience. In general, if you divide the common land use type within the wildlife sanctuary, it's about 54% is agriculture, 22% is still mangrove, 14% open water, 4% mud flats, human settlements only 2%, and aquaculture about 2%. So after this background, I want to sort of give a little update on the study that we conducted. This is a map which indicates the study sites, and the coastal area is the wildlife sanctuary, and we have selected 8 sites which are indicated in as dark circles, triangles, diamonds, and these sites basically represent 4 main land cover types, which is common, as I mentioned earlier, in the wildlife sanctuary. This is scrub mangroves, aquaculture, planted mangroves, and dense mangroves. So our objective was to see what are the ecosystem carbon stocks within the Bhitarkanika wildlife sanctuaries and how those stocks vary within different land cover types. Because this wildlife sanctuary has mangrove cover, which can be divided into scrub mangrove, dense mangrove, and planted mangrove, as well as there were abandoned aquaculture ponds, which used to be mangrove, but were converted into aquaculture ponds. So our idea was to see what differences or similarities we find in the carbon stocks, and does that have an implication on how it can be maintained going forward. So I've tried to just squeeze the results in one slide for the interest of time, and I would like to spend some time on this slide. So if you look at the graph on the left side, the x-axis is the 4 land cover type, y-axis is the carbon stocks in milligrams of carbon per hectare, which is tons of carbon per hectare. The 4 categories are aquaculture, planted, scrub, and dense. And then each bar is divided into the carbon the carbon fraction that was measured in the mangrove farm. So we quantified soil carbon, above ground carbon, carbon in woody debris, and below ground carbon. As you can see, the lowest carbon was recorded in aquaculture because there was only soil carbon there. There was no above ground carbon, there was nothing there, no below ground, no woody debris, and no below ground carbon contributed by vegetation because there was no vegetation. The highest amount of carbon was found in scrub and dense, while the planted mangroves had more carbon than aquaculture, but it has not reached the final terminal stage where its carbon stocks would be similar to dense or scrub mangroves.
Rupesh, you have
Yes.
2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay. So carbon storages in mangrove soils of Bhitarkanika were lower than the global average. And the reason could be that a lot of people depend on this ecosystem for fuel, fodder, and other non-timber forest produce. So that may be affecting the productivity of the forest. According to one estimate, about 8,000 tons of fuel wood was removed annually from Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary area, which could have eventually led into the carbon stock. Also, this area receives annual flooding and sediment from these rivers, which can also affect or influence the deposition and accrual of loss of carbon from mangrove areas. So these are some of the reasons why we think the carbon stocks are lower in this area. Now I want to quickly talk about vulnerability of coastal areas, which is natural causes and anthropogenic causes. And one of the biggest challenge in this area particularly is to conserve wildlife and protect human populations. So how do we reconcile conflict? This is a screenshot, this is a news article which came last year, where the government is removing boundary of an abandoned pond which was illegally established within the wildlife area. Daniel mentioned in the beginning about the cyclone Fani, which arrived on the coast of Orissa on 3rd May. It was one of the most intense storms that hit coastal Orissa in last 20 years, and it was one of the longest lived storms too. It lasted for 11 days. We are still assessing the impacts, but there were 41 people who died and a huge loss of property and other coastal damages. So when we talk about sustainability of coastal landscapes, what is important, what our learning is that there should be opportunities for partnership, research, and management of coastal mangroves with involvement of local communities, particularly in a landscape like this. We have to probably work towards establishing best practice guidelines for mangrove selective harvesting to support communities, and then identify locally appropriate monitoring schemes for indicators for continued assessment of mangrove. And then make policies that capture uncertainties and are flexible to adapt and adjust to new challenges. Most important is to understand the interrelationships, because if there are healthy mangroves which can survive climate change, then they can provide ecosystem services and goods for sustainability of the landscape and survival of human population. And it works back and forth, one supporting other. So this is my last slide, summary. Bhitarkanika Wildlife Sanctuary offers an interesting case study where human dependence on mangroves have resulted in degradation of these resources. Forest Department and government agencies face constant challenge to reduce this degradation and restore mangroves, and there needs to be a better understanding of these ecosystem services offered by mangroves. That's where the role of science comes in, where if we understand if we can quantify and understand all the services provided, and if we put value to it, and then those economic benefits can be shared with local communities, and it would be helpful for the conservation going forward. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I think it needs all the parties involved to come together for successful conservation of mangrove, and it can't be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rupesh. I think that's a very interesting explanation, and also new information that we heard about the cyclone Fani, and also the different kind of managing mangrove or conserving mangrove with regard to the biodiversity of the region. And I think that's a good example of the ecosystem services. It's really promising in many ways, because it's not only carbon, it's not only the fish, but many other opportunities that people can generate their livelihood. Is there any questions from the audience or from the panelists? I don't see any question coming out from the audience. It's certainly a different setting of mangrove in Tutakanita. I wonder if Tui is there.
Hello.
I don't see.
Hey, sorry.
Can I have a question to
Yep.
Rupesh?
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, thank you. You mentioned earlier that government face a constant challenge in terms of conserving and restoring mangrove in India. Can you elaborate more what kind of this challenge? Technical or policy or social?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your question. This basically, I think all three of them will apply here, because this area is basically wildlife sanctuary, and the national park falls under what they call mangrove forest division, which is under Department of Forest or Forest Department. And they, since it's a wildlife sanctuary, they have to basically follow the rule in terms of the paramount importance for them is to conserve wildlife. So there should be no harm to, say, crocodile or the birds or the mangroves or anything. Whereas there are already revenue villages inside the wildlife sanctuary, which are accepted by government. So there comes the revenue department, which is responsible for providing, say, schools, roads, health centers within the sanctuary itself, so that all people, because it's a sizable number of people living inside sanctuaries, and their demands for social, I would say, access to these facilities is there. So the challenges is how the intergovernmental agencies, how do they work? Because the forest department would claim that some of the needs are illegal and they are infringing upon the quality of wildlife, or it results into poor habitat condition for wildlife. Whereas the social ministry or the Department of Revenue would say that these people have no other means of revenue, and they have to be dependent on forest resources, whether be it fishing, be it cattle rearing, be it doing some aquaculture activities to sustain themselves. So these challenges basically are at all level, at very local level, on the grassroots level, how to provide people with their basic needs, but also at the policy level, how do you make policies? Because if you need to relocate this large number of people, then you need to find a proper place where they would be given farmland or a house and all that. And in a country like India, where resources everywhere, not just in this setting, but outside is not available easily, it presents a difficult challenge. And most of the times it takes shape of the political cycle, because the governments are elected on a 5-year cycle. And there are times when decisions are not made because it could be controversial in either way, and it kind of just is prolonged. So it is, I don't know if I was able to answer your question, but I was trying to present you that the challenges basically straddle all levels of government, all levels of policies, and with the given uncertainties of climate change, sea level rise, the government has not caught up with those and new challenges either.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, well, there is a question through Twitter, maybe for you and Nev, which I think it's regarding sustainability. Is there any way of involving young people, young generation, school children, students, you know, not only just for ceremonial issue planting mangrove, but for raising awareness for the future? For both of you.
Who first, Rupesh? I can say what we're doing and that's a very good question. There's a decay in traditional knowledge of how to manage mangrove sustainably, and as I said in my presentation, mangroves provide an enormous wealth of resources for local communities, which can support can support social development. But with modernization going on in this world, that traditional knowledge of how to manage mangroves is gradually being lost. What we're advocating for now through the village development plan is to re-engage the youth of villages to monitor their mangroves and look for issues which occur early on. So instead of things decaying and becoming beyond the sustainability threshold, to catch those issues early on, and to engage youth into looking after their mangroves, so it looks after their future, and they've got a good and bright economic future for their future generations.
Excellent. What about in Indian context, Rupesh?
So Daniel, I came across one study while preparing this presentation that in 2015 there was one more cyclone that hit coast Fallen, and one village was spared a lot of damage because they had their village community group that planted and protected mangrove, and most of the houses in that village was spared the brunt of the high strong winds. So that is one example where it kind of came together organically. There was a village level thing. It wasn't an intervention that came from the top or from someone else going in. But I haven't come across those examples in a manner or at a scale that I could see that it is happening, or it is a sort of a movement that is going on. From our experience of the visit, it seemed like as it is, the landscape is heavily populated, like very densely populated. And it boils down to the economic incentives, because there is only so many people who could be involved in this activity thinking that it will benefit them in some way, form or shape. But due to this quick change, as Nev just mentioned, this everyone wants to move to the city, or everyone wants to have all the good smartphone and connectivity to internet and things like that.
Okay, good. Well, I think it's a good example and story to tell about the importance of mangrove from other perspectives. Huh? Good. Well, I'm not sure if we can have Tui, but basically, do you see her?
I don't think so.
No?
She isn't joined.
Now, what she's going to explain actually related to mangrove is like what the body of work like CIFOR, USFS, and other organizations trying to do with at the policy spheres, dealing with how can we use or how can we include mangrove or blue carbon in the nationally determined contribution. But since Rupesh is also involved, perhaps you victimize Rupesh to explain what is this plan of workshop on including or incorporating blue carbon in the NDC to be held in Vietnam, in Hanoi, and perhaps in the next 2 or 3 minutes, you can briefly describe what it is being planned.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm happy to share what I can in this time. So, a workshop CIFOR in association with US Forest Service and the USAID is organizing a workshop in Hanoi. It's going to be a regional workshop, and the title is Incorporating Blue Carbon in Nationally Determined Contributions. And the focus would be to utilize the scientific knowledge we have on mangroves from the work done largely, work of body that's done largely from swamp and elsewhere too. And sort of provide this platform where discussion could happen, facilitation could happen between country delegates. So we are inviting delegates from 14 countries in Southeast Asia and Pacific region, which have blue carbon ecosystem. And the focus, or what I will say, the outcome of this workshop, the objective of this workshop is that these delegates, when they attend this workshop, they are aware of the progress that has been made in the scientific aspect of blue carbon and our understanding of blue carbon ecosystems, and how those could be utilized in the country reporting in terms of their nationally communicated contributions, so that they can get the credit or benefit of conserving and protecting those blue carbon ecosystems. So this is in the nutshell. We have a good lineup of speakers, international folks coming from Australia, US, and elsewhere, who have done this kind of work before and have worked with different country governments to include or to prepare their NDCs, which take into consideration blue carbon ecosystems and the values therein. And with those people in one place, we hope the 2 days will provide a very good environment to discuss and address some of the challenges which are there. And share the learnings
Connection problem.
in there between people. And of course, Daniel can add more if I have something.
Okay. Well, right. So yes, this is a big undertaking that us is involved, and we are looking forward to have that workshop and participants. And if you, the virtual participant of this webinar, are interested, you can send us message. We can tell you what we are covering. But certainly this webinar is recorded. So I was told by the host that anytime you can always revisit his sites so that you can listen what's been discussed with regard to wetland. And certainly science is going to be more and more flourishing as the challenges out there. So thank you very much, all the speakers, for your generous contribution. You know, a lot of new things we've been revealing here. So thank you for your participation.
Thanks very much, Daniel.
Prof. Daniel. Thank you.
Good night.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel, and the other speakers for a very valuable discussion on the role of peatlands and wetlands in mitigating climate change whilst contributing to the resilience of communities, providing biodiversity protection and maintaining livelihoods. Thank you to all of those watching and asking questions online and being part of this global narrative. As we continue our journey around the world during this third act of the Global Landscapes Forum Digital Edition, it is my pleasure to introduce our next discussion forum, coming live from Nairobi, hosted by UN Environment. The recently announced UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is building momentum to address the climate biodiversity crisis at massive scale, over a decade and beyond. So we have high hopes for this discussion forum to provide us with much needed inspiration and a strong starting point. For those of you joining online, don't forget to submit questions and comments via the live stream chat box or via social media using the hashtags ThinkLandscape and GLF Kyoto 2019. We now welcome moderator Masunda Mumba and wish you all a lively discussion. Thank you.